Hello, my name is Stefan Gianquito, and in this presentation, I'll be discussing my research project titled The Road to Financial Sustainability, Are Councils on the Right Track? This research project has been undertaken as part of my studies with the Centre of Pavement Engineering Education under the Infrastructure Asset Management Program. The structure of this presentation will be as follows. Firstly, the aims and objectives of my research project will be discussed. Next, we will set the scene by briefly exploring the role of councils. Next, the concept of financial sustainability will be explored within the context of local government. We will then look at the role of asset management as it relates to local government. We will then explore the findings of the literature review, which also involves a case study involving the Central Darling Shire Council in New South Wales. Following the literature review, the research methodology adopted will be discussed, followed closely by the presentation of the research results and their interpretation as they relate to the aims of the research. Finally, the presentation will conclude with a brief summary of the implications of the results and highlight a series of recommendations for future practice. The aims of the research have been to investigate if South Australian councils are operating in a financially sustainable manner whilst considering their asset management capability. Consideration of asset management capability was particularly important in this research, as previous studies had failed to consider the capacity of councils to implement good asset management practices when considering their ability to operate in a financially sustainable manner. There were also a number of objectives that the research sought to achieve. These include define challenges and barriers facing councils in achieving a financially sustainable position, research previous measures of financial sustainability, research the link and gaps between asset management and financial management practice, compare and contrast councils across different regions, quantify asset management capability, and provide recommendations to assist with achieving long-term financial sustainability. To set the scene, I would like you to think about your local council. Try and think about the duties that they perform and the services they provide. Think about the impact that they have on your daily lives. Now, typically when people think of councils, they think of roads, rates, and rubbish. And historically, this is what they were initially set up to do. But today, councils play a bigger role. Councils, first and foremost, are service providers. They provide a vast array of services ranging from sweeping your streets to running the local wastewater treatment plant. Much of council service delivery capacity relies on large infrastructure networks, the most common of which is the road network, but also includes buildings, the stormwater system, parks and gardens, airports, and even domestic water supply plants. These infrastructure networks represent a significant investment over time by local communities and must be properly maintained to ensure their services can be provided to the required quality for current and future users. This is where we get into the concept of financial sustainability. Since the turn of the century, the recognition of financial distress in local government became well known, with numerous national and state-based inquiries into the financial sustainability of local councils. Many of the various inquiries provided their own definition of financial sustainability, which made it difficult to draw meaningful comparisons between them. A shortcoming of many of the definitions is that they purely focused on the financial aspects or measures of sustainability. Whilst it is acknowledged that you can't have a definition of financial sustainability without due consideration of financial matters, when speaking in the context of councils, a fundamental measure which must not be overlooked when defining financial sustainability is the impacts associated with service provision. A more suitable definition, which has been adopted by this research, was developed by the Financial Sustainability Review Board of South Australia and published in their report, Rising to the Challenge. A council's long-term financial performance and position is sustainable where continuation of a council's present spending and funding policies, likely developments in the council's revenue-raising capacity and the demand for and costs of its services and infrastructure, and normal financial risks and financial shocks altogether are unlikely to necessitate substantial increases in council rates or alternative disruptive service cuts. Within this definition, we begin to see the importance of service provision and the role it plays in operating in a financially sustainable manner. So, if the provision of services is so important, how can councils measure how well the service is being provided? This is where the role of asset management comes into play. The role of asset management is very powerful for any organisation which is heavily dependent on infrastructure assets to be able to fulfil their service delivery objectives, and councils are no exception. The 2015 International Infrastructure Management Manual, prepared by the Institute of Public Works Engineering Australasia, states that the goal of asset management is to meet a required level of service in the most cost-effective manner through the management of assets for present and future customers. Within this definition, we see the themes of levels of service, cost-effective, management of infrastructure, and present and future customers, which is also infers that it is applicable now, but also into the future. From looking at this definition, you might ask yourself, what determines the required level of service? The answer to that question is risk. At its core, asset management involves the delicate balance between levels of service, which is basically the quality of service you're providing, the cost of providing that service, and the risk associated with providing the service at the level of quality defined. This is a never-ending cycle of balance, which is a mammoth task, particularly when you consider that this balancing act has to occur across all of the various services that Council provides. Now let's briefly look at an example of this balance when considering roads. Let's picture a council who reseals their roads on average once every 20 years. They have determined that this frequency allows the road network to be in a safe and suitable condition, which is aligned to the amount of risk they are willing to accept. They've also determined that there is sufficient annual revenue being generated to cover the cost of annual reseals at this frequency. They have achieved a balance. Now imagine that the community has asked for a new road to improve travel times between two popular destinations. This is akin to asking for a new service which will require additional funding. In order to fund the new road, the council may choose to increase revenue, borrow money, or reduce the quality of existing services. If they increase revenue, they must do so knowing it is affordable for the community. If they borrow money, they must be satisfied that it can be paid back over time without substantial increases to revenue. Or if they reduce the quality of services, such as increasing the frequency between road reseals, then they must accept the risk associated with that. The previous example has shown us the link between asset management and financial sustainability. From an asset management perspective, financial sustainability can be viewed as the ability to provide essential services at an acceptable level of service over the medium to long term without the need to introduce disruptive revenue or expenditure measures. It stands to reason that if a council has strong capacity or maturity in its asset management practices, then it would also be a council who has all of the right systems in place to operate in a financially sustainable manner. We will now discuss the findings of the literature review. The discussion of the findings from the literature review is divided into 4 parts. Part 1 involves examining the findings from the financially sustainability inquiries from a national and state perspective. Part 2 involves the investigation of the link between financial sustainability and asset management maturity and levels of service. Part 3 involves identifying the nationally consistent frameworks and legislative changes which have been prompted from these inquiries. And finally, Part 4 examines how financial sustainability is currently measured in South Australia and will report on current trends. One of the most notable national-based inquiries into the financial sustainability of local government was commissioned by the Australian Local Government Association and undertaken by PricewaterhouseCoopers. The report from 2006, titled National Financial Sustainability Study of Local Government, found that 35% of councils nationally are unsustainable, and it is estimated that there is a $3.1 million infrastructure renewal backlog per council, which amounts to around $2.16 billion nationally per year. The inquiry also found that urban councils are largely sustainable. However, rural councils demonstrated pronounced financial sustainability problems. A common issue among those with sustainability problems was that they were stepping in and providing non-traditional services, and also they had limited access to strong financial and asset management skills. Since 2012, the Australian Local Government Association has encouraged all local governments to participate in a self-assessment survey of their infrastructure performance and management practices, known as the National State of the Assets Project. In 2018, the report found that $30 billion is required to renew and replace aging infrastructure. The shortfall amount exceeds the funding capacity of local government. And councils estimate that $24 billion of current infrastructure value has poor capacity, with the upgrade cost likely to be 5 times as much. And finally, councils are renewing approximately 82% of the infrastructure they have identified as needing replacement. One of the most notable inquiries into the financial sustainability of South Australian local government was commissioned by the Local Government Association of South Australia. The report from 2005, titled Rising to the Challenge Towards Financial Sustainable Local Government in South Australia, found that 26 of South Australia's 68 councils are in a financially unsustainable category. And the infrastructure renewal backlog in aggregate was estimated to be in excess of $300 million. This is approximately $4.4 million per council. They also found that most councils did not define levels of service. There was a strong aversion to debt, and they were suffering from short-term, typically 1 year, planning horizons. In establishing the link between asset management maturity and financial sustainability, the International Infrastructure Management Manual was interrogated. In the 2015 version of the manual, the Asset Management Maturity Index is introduced. The index rates councils' maturity on a scale of 1 to 5, with 3 being core. At a core level, a council should have defined and measured levels of service. It should have developed infrastructure and asset management plans, as well as long-term financial plans covering a period of at least 10 years. A financial sustainability report released by the Department of Infrastructure and Planning stated that financial sustainability is demonstrated when a council has a long-term infrastructure and asset management plan, its infrastructure asset management plan is linked to a long-term financial plan, and it can manage financial implications identified in these plans over the long term. Hence, it was concluded that if a council can operate at a core level of maturity, then it is able to operate in a financially sustainable manner. Levels of service also play a key part in financial sustainability. Level of service are essentially statements that describe the outputs an organisation intends to deliver. They often link the cost of a service with the quality of service being provided. In the Walker and Jones paper on the financial sustainability of councils, they concluded that a council in financial distress is one who can't deliver services at pre-existing levels. A key limitation of this concluding statement was that it assumed that current service levels would be suitable for future users. As we know, community wants and needs are dynamic. Therefore, so are levels of service. Hence, it was concluded that levels of service must be constantly reviewed and measured. After all, you can't manage what you can't measure. In all of the national and state-based inquiries that were researched, they all identified common issues, these being inconsistencies in measurements and reporting of financial data, variability in financial treatment of assets, and incomplete financial and asset management records. In recognition of the findings from these inquiries, the Local Government and Planning Ministers Council published nationally consistent frameworks to guide councils in improving their asset management and financial management practices. Of the 3 frameworks developed, Framework 1 promoted the use of financial sustainability indicators, which would allow a consistent measure of the financial sustainability of local government. Legislation has also had an important role in promoting financial sustainability. Within South Australia, the Local Government Act is the most significant act concerning these matters. Chapter 8, Administrative and Financial Accountability, consists of 6 parts and essentially defines the administrative and financial requirements of councils. The most significant of these parts is Part 1, titled Strategic Management Plans, in which it requires councils to develop long-term financial plans and infrastructure asset management plans covering a 10-year planning horizon, and also states that these must be linked. The legislation also requires that these strategic management plans report on the sustainability of councils, the levels of service being provided, and debt levels. It also states that these plans must be reviewed and updated annually. Within South Australia, The South Australian Local Government Financial Management Group developed 3 indicators to measure financial sustainability. Indicator 1, titled Operating Surplus Ratio, provides the ratio of annual operating income to annual operating expenses. And essentially, to be financially sustainable, you want over the long term for your operating income to exceed your operating expense. The second indicator, Net Financial Liabilities Ratio, is a ratio of net liabilities to annual operating income and provides a measure of the level of indebtedness that a council is in. Indicator 3, Asset Sustainability Ratio, is a ratio of the annual expenditure on infrastructure renewals compared with what was identified in the infrastructure and asset management plans. It is essentially a measure of whether a council is optimising the timing of its renewals. We will now briefly look at the case study of the financial plight of the Central Darling Shire Council in New South Wales. It was the first ever local government in Australia to fail as a result of being financially unsustainable. In the next few slides, we'll explore how this happened. The Central Darling Shire Council is 970 kilometres west of Sydney and covers an area exceeding 5 million hectares. It has a 1,602 kilometre road network, which is the highest road length per capita in New South Wales, and services 1,580 properties. It also has the second lowest socio-economic rating in New South Wales, and in recent times has had to step in to run the local post office, caravan park, and banking agency. In Drew and Campbell's assessment of what went wrong, they found multiple factors, including environmental constraints due to the sheer expanse of the area that this council had to manage, the heavy infrastructure burden brought on about the size of their road network, their low taxation base, the fact that they had the 5th lowest residential rates in New South Wales, and the fact they were receiving insufficient intergovernmental grants. In fact, it was the lowest roads funding per kilometre of any council in New South Wales. These issues are not just unique to Central Darling Shire Council, but also to many other rural councils. We will now discuss the research methodology adopted for this project. To assess whether South Australian councils are operating in a financially sustainable manner, the question was approached by looking at 3 key components. The first being the past and current financial performance of councils, the second being the implementation of asset management practices, and the third being the demand factors which would likely impact the ongoing service delivery of that council. To assess these 3 components, a framework consisting of 3 key focus areas was developed, comprising Focus Area 1, Financial Performance, Focus Area 2, Asset Management Capability, and Focus Area 3, Infrastructure Performance and Future Demand. The research methodology was structured in such a way that the ability for the councils to operate in a financially sustainable manner could be assessed with consideration of past and current performance, as well as other factors which might influence their capacity to do so in the future. After all, operating in a financially sustainable manner is a long-term endeavour. Key focus area in the research revolved around road assets. This asset base, as evidenced by reports released by the Office of Local Government, is the largest and most expensive asset base for South Australian councils, and consequently presents the greatest liability financially and from a service risk perspective if not managed properly. Each focused area comprised a set of measures and targets which would assist with assessing the financial sustainability of the South Australian local government sector. In order to quantify the extent of each measure, quantitative and qualitative research techniques were adopted, which involved 2 key analysis areas. The first being the collection and analysis of raw data associated with the 3 financial indicators used in South Australia, and the second was the preparation of a self-assessment survey, which was disseminated to all 68 South Australian councils. The online survey was available for 3 weeks and generated responses from 34 councils, or 50% of the total councils in South Australia. Of those councils, 16 were rural and 18 were urban. Each council that responded to the survey was classified based on their geographic location, population, and socioeconomics in accordance with the Australian Classification of Local Government Scheme. Each of the 22 individual categories of the classification scheme were further refined into 5 subgroups, which made the distinction between rural and urban councils, as well as their various sizes according to their population base. In order to quantify the financial performance of South Australian councils, 4 indicators were used. The financial indicator ratio results for the surveyed councils were compared to the target ranges recommended by the Local Government Association of South Australia and are shown in the blue brackets. A fourth indicator, the degree of variance, has been proposed as a measure of the volatility or stability in the way a council financially operates for any given year. In the assessment of a council's asset management capability, the following attributes were considered critical for councils to operate in a financially sustainable manner over the long term. It was also critical for 100% of the surveyed councils to display the following attributes and be practicing with at least a core level of maturity. In order to build a clear understanding of the financial sustainability of South Australian councils, a qualitative assessment approach was used as part of the Focus Area 3 to provide an indication of the future challenges facing councils and the likely influence it would have on their ability to achieve a financially sustainable position over the long term. The following 5 factors were considered and analysed as part of this assessment. We will now review and discuss the research results. For Focus Area 1, the research has shown that councils have been steadily improving their capacity to generate sufficient income to offset their annual expenses. This is particularly true for rural councils who have consistently performed better than their urban counterparts. Councils, and in particular rural councils, have very low levels of debt with respect to the value of their infrastructure assets. The degree of variance between year-to-year results are also very small, indicating stability in the operating conditions of the councils over the 5-year period. In light of the trends obtained in the operating surplus ratio and net financial liabilities ratio, councils are in a position to increase the level of borrowings to finance capital expenditure if required. Furthermore, on average over the 4-year reporting period, both rural and urban councils have achieved asset sustainability ratios of at least 88%. The degree of variability between year-to-year results remains high, inferring volatility in the way councils are investing in infrastructure renewals. You consider the ratio results in totality, but in the absence of asset management performance results, the financial performance of South Australian councils has been positive and demonstrates that councils are currently operating in a financially sustainable manner. For Focus Area 2, the research regarding asset management capability has highlighted deficiencies regarding the accuracy, currency, and degree of maturity of infrastructure and asset management plans, as well as long-term financial plans. All councils, but in particular the rural ones, fail to meet the minimum planning and reporting requirements to achieve the outcomes prescribed in legislation. Of most concern is the fact that the majority of councils do not currently measure the levels of service provided by their assets. This severely hinders councils' ability to accurately forecast future expenditure requirements against optimal levels of capital expenditure required to provide desired and affordable service levels. Without intervention, there is likely to be a diminishing ability to forecast and finance future infrastructure investment and meet future needs due to demand and growth. For Focus Area 3, the research found that the road asset portfolio is the largest asset base for South Australian councils, with 72% of the road network owned by the rural councils. Overall, councils have a good appreciation of the condition and functional ratings of their road networks, with all survey participants indicating that this data is collected. 9% of councils indicated that they do not collect data pertaining to the capacity or utilisation of their road networks. Despite the overall performance of the road networks currently being in a fair to good condition, the large rural agricultural and urban regional councils will see a large portion of their network tend to poor condition in the near future compared with the other councils. In light of the current asset management maturity, the ongoing management of the road network to maintain a suitable condition standard presents a real and emergent challenge for both rural and urban councils, highlighting the threat to their capacity to operate in a financially sustainable manner over the long term. Troublingly, 43% of councils' infrastructure asset management plans were indicating funding shortfalls for renewal, maintenance, and operating expenditures for all assets, including roads. If these numbers are supported by soundly prepared infrastructure asset management plans, then it is likely that 43% of councils are either currently or in future not able to operate in a financially sustainable manner. For the majority of rural councils, the demand caused by the increase in heavy vehicles is the demand factor most likely to influence the financial sustainability of those councils in the future? For urban councils, it's a combination of the demand brought by increased population, higher quality existing services, and increased heavy vehicles. We will now look at the conclusions and recommendations of the research. The research has concluded that the current financial performance of South Australian councils has indicated that they are currently operating in a financially sustainable manner. However, when you consider that the maturity of current asset management and financial management practice is lacking, coupled with a road network approaching poor physical condition, and the increased pressures associated with the demand for more heavy vehicles and higher quality existing services, it soon becomes apparent that South Australian councils are not on the right track and will be unable to operate in a financially sustainable manner into the future. In light of the findings of the research, it is recommended that an organisational commitment to asset management planning led by upper management within each council be adopted. Also, councils allocate sufficient funding for asset management capability building. Also, councils should develop measurable targets for their levels of service statements and engage with the community to arrive at agreed service levels which are affordable. Also, local government regulators should audit the infrastructure asset management plans and long-term financial plans so they are aligned, relevant, up to date, and as a minimum are compliant with legislative requirements. Finally, councils should continue to improve their maturity in asset management practice to the point where they can demonstrate and provide sustainable and affordable levels of service to their communities. Thank you for listening to my presentation.